I'm not gonna like you. I can tell right away, out of everyone here, I like you the least.
Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, I've got 3 movies for you. I've got the bad one, which is in the title of the video, and I have 2 other movies that I've seen in the cinema recently, which I can recommend without any reservation at all. So we'll start out with the bad one, the red one, an incredibly cynical Christmas movie which rode into cinemas on the ego of one of its stars, Dwayne Johnson. The reason I got the title on the thumbnail, Dwayne Johnson, is a sook. I probably have to explain sook. It's Australian colloquial slang, and it means a wuss, crybaby, a sook. It's very old Australian slang, but it is slang that has a purpose in this benighted century in which we live. There are things about Red One I like. I'll be honest with you, I don't mind a Christmas movie with a supernatural theme. In fact, I like a number of them. But this one is weird. And it's weird because Dwayne Johnson is a weird movie star. I'll do the plot of the movie, I'll tell you the pluses, and then I'll tell you why I said that. Chris Evans plays a guy called Jack O'Malley who's very, very good at finding things. He can do the dark web thing. He can find anything. And he's given this anonymous job to find a weird flying anomaly which disappears somewhere near the North Pole. He doesn't know that it's Santa Claus. He doesn't know that Santa lives in a city under a dome which is stealth protected by technology beyond human understanding. Doesn't know any of that. He just gives the coordinates to the middleman that he was hired by, and those coordinates are then given to an evil witch played by Keenan Shipka, who basically wants to put everybody who's on the naughty list into magical snow globes because they're naughty, like an extreme naughty lister. So Jack gives that information, and the information is used to find Santa's dome and to break into it and kidnap Santa Claus. Meanwhile, Santa Claus's main henchman, a guy called Callum Drift, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, is then tasked with getting Santa Claus back. The clock's running down. They've got a day and a half to do it. And so he hires Jack O'Malley, or kidnaps him basically, in order to help him find Santa Claus. And they go on this quest across various places to find Santa and to rescue him. Callum being the head of the ELF, which is the police force for Santa Claus. I forget what it stands for. Basically bullies Jack into helping him. Now, Jack has a side plot about being estranged from his son. He was never married to the kid's mother. They had a one-night stand kind of thing. She got pregnant. They had a child, and he feels responsible for the kid, but he's a deadbeat dad. There's, of course, an arc in that, and everything gets resolved in the end because the movie halfway through remembers it's a Christmas movie. So there's a lot of good CG stuff. There's a lot of reasonable world building in it. There's an organization worldwide that protects mythological monsters, which is run by Lucy Liu, and she knows what kind of movie this is, exactly the same way that Chris Evans does. And Santa Claus, played by J.K. Simmons, is probably the most valuable player in this. He brings a real humanity and a warmth to Santa. Santa bench presses, and Santa burns up enormous amounts of energy getting to everybody's house on Christmas Eve, that kind of stuff. And he brings a certain riz to it. Again, he knows what kind of movie it is, and he leans into it and does a really good job of it. The supporting cast is okay. You get people I like Nick Kroll in there as well, playing the middleman. And Nick Kroll does know what kind of movie this is. And then we get to the spider on the fruitcake, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Dwayne Johnson's career is falling off a cliff. He did Black Adam for DC, and Black Adam died in the ass because of his ego. He wanted Black Adam to be the takeover guy for Superman, and that was never going to be. That movie was fraught with his demands and his ego and his insistence that he is the best thing since espresso coffee. So there are a lot of things that came out about the making of Red One which make it interesting in a kind of creepy way. First off, so Dwayne Johnson, by his own admission, and there is an interview with him where he does this, goes and sees Oppenheimer at an IMAX cinema. And it's an IMAX cinema that Christopher Nolan had used for previewing his IMAX movies. And so Dwayne Johnson wants to sit in exactly the same seat that Christopher Nolan does. And he watches Oppenheimer from exactly the same angle in exactly the same cinema as Christopher Nolan did, and decides he wants Red One to be an IMAX movie. In reality, Red One is a streaming movie. It belongs on a streaming service. You watch it on a streaming service. You have it in your list to watch it. It's fun while you're watching it. It's got the supernatural stuff. It's got some great special effects and things like that. And it cost $250 million. So that's one aspect of it. Dwayne Johnson insisted this thing be made for IMAX. It having been made for IMAX means that the movie has to go into cinemas before it ever gets to streaming. It's probably going to find its place when it does get to Amazon Prime, because the movie was made by MGM, which is owned by Amazon, which is owned by Jeff Bezos. And the type and scope of this movie is the kind of movie that belongs in a streaming service, which isn't to say it's bad, but it's not tentpole cinema good. That's one aspect of it. The ego of Dwayne Johnson insisted this movie be made for IMAX, and he had enough clout to make sure that happened. Second thing is that stories start coming out about Dwayne Johnson in the making of Red 1. The first one, which is creepy as hell, is that rather than go to a toilet while they were filming, Dwayne Johnson decided that what he would do is walk over to the side of the set and piss into Voss water bottles, and then have an assistant get rid of them for him. It's a bit like the piss boy in History of the World Part 1.
Will, sire, except for the beauty mark on the moustache. There's our double.
Bleu. God, you're right. I do look like the piss boy.
Dwayne Johnson has a piss boy. Maybe a piss woman. Creepy as hell. Freaky. Put a porta potty there for him and just let him do that, but he wouldn't go to a toilet. He insisted to just go over to the side of the set, unship the meat, and let loose into a posh drink bottle. Hold that thought. The other thing is, while they were making the movie, he would be up to 8 hours late turning up on set, because he had to get his workouts done. He had other things to do. You got to remember that there are hundreds and hundreds of people on a set waiting around for this bald-headed donut to show up so they can film things. They shot a lot of things around him because of that. And they got to the stage where they were making, if Dwayne doesn't turn up, which scene are we going to shoot kind of decisions, which does in itself cost a lot of money for a production, and probably bumped up the budget of that film by an amount that would buy you 2 holiday homes. So there's that. Now, all that taken together, this movie was damaged by ego. It was damaged by Dwayne Johnson's ego. Turning up late on a movie set by significant amounts of time and pissing into bottles and getting your assistant to take them away is a power play. It's an ego thing. It's a privilege thing. It's like, I can do this, so I will do this. It's like, to a lesser extent, of course, Louis C.K. jerking off in front of female comedians because he had the power in the industry to get away with it for a certain time. There's a certain privilege and a certain potential kink there with Dwayne Johnson and his piss bottles. When I saw Red 1, I couldn't help but think while I was watching it, where are the bottles? Are they behind that particular bit of the set, or are they behind another bit of the set? It messed with my head big time while I was watching the movie. But that isn't to say the movie's entirely bad. There's some great scenes with Krampus and some very good physical makeup effects to give us Krampus, who is much taller than Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And the one bit I really loved was when Krampus gets into a slapping contest with Callum Drift and slaps Dwayne Johnson across the room. I wasn't unhappy with that scene. And the actor playing Krampus does a great job. He acts through the makeup. He's big. He emotes. He has an arc for his character. There's some really great stuff there with those scenes and all the physical makeup effects for Krampus and his crew. That stuff landed well. A scene where Dwayne Johnson's character was secondary to Krampus and to Krampus's arc, and when Krampus does have something of a redemption arc, the fact that Krampus was played and displayed so well lands that particular subplot of the movie. I've had some thoughts about Dwayne Johnson, and my summary is this. He's the laziest of actors. And I'm not talking physically, I'm talking about bench pressing tractors and towing wheels around and all sorts of shit like that. I'm talking about in the characters he plays. Every character Dwayne Johnson plays is the same. If you look at people who are on roughly the same level as him, even Statham is branching out and doing different things. And Statham, when he's playing any kind of action role, has a certain awareness and a certain self-depreciating demeanour in playing those characters, so that he lets the audience in on it. And I really like that. I think Statham's self-depreciation as an actor, and the fact that he has done some dramatic roles and done them quite well within the framework of the kind of movies Jason Statham makes, allowing for some variation in there and including the audience into what he's doing in a way that Dwayne Johnson doesn't. Every bloody character he plays is the same. He is a lazy actor. He gets the big money. He plays it all the same. He raises that eyebrow. He acts tough. He puffs out his chest, which is already pretty puffed out. That will only play for a certain amount of time. So my prediction is that Dwayne Johnson's career is on a downward trajectory for the simple reason that he pisses off his co-workers, he plays the ego trips, and he doesn't offer enough of an actor's job for people to put up with that indefinitely. And so he will descend in the hierarchy of film stars inevitably over the next 5 years. So I saw that and I was pissed off with it. Then I saw a couple of films at the cinema. I saw them both at the Sun in Yarraville, which is my favourite cinema. And these ones are movies that remind me why I love cinema. They weren't cynical Amazon MGM things like Red One was. They're much smaller movies, but they've got a passion that I really appreciated. Now, the first one was directed by Jason Reitman. By the way, Red One was directed by Jake Kasdan, Lawrence Kasdan's son. This one, again, was directed by the son of a movie director, Jason Kasdan's Saturday Night. It's a slightly fictionalized version of the first ever Saturday Night Live when it was just called Saturday Night. And they're putting together the team that became the not ready for primetime players. Belushi, Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, Jane Curtin, Lorraine Newman, Gilda Radner. That ensemble of heavy hitters who really changed comedy on television forever. And this movie has an energy to it that I totally loved. There is the ensemble. You can see them all there. I'm not going to go through who all the actors are, but they're playing the roles that I've just mentioned of the original Saturday Night Live cast. We've also got somebody playing Lord Michaels, who's the producer, and has been for 50 years now. And it's October the 11th, 1975, 10 p.m. The 2 hours before Saturday Night Live is shown live on air. And the network isn't even sure they're going to show it. They've got a rerun of Johnny Carson ready in case Saturday night doesn't happen. It's all going to be done live. The set's not completed. The cast is all over the place. George Carlin, who's the guest host, doesn't want to do any of the sketches, so he's just going to do his stand-up. You got Muppets on there and Jim Henson running the Muppets. And Jim Henson's on a totally different level than the anarchic National Lampoon-inspired people who became the cast of Saturday Night Live. We also have Andy Kaufman, who does his iconic Mighty Mouse bit on the first night of Saturday Night Live. In fact, I watched that first episode after I saw Saturday Night. And this doesn't stay entirely true to that. It's got a whole bunch of people who didn't turn up in Saturday Night Live until later. You get a guy playing Billy Crystal who's trying to get his particular sketch onto the show, even though the dress rehearsal went 3 hours and the live show is only going to go an hour and a half. And Lorne Michaels is making these decisions on what will stay and what won't stay. Belushi hasn't signed his contract yet. Everything's going wrong. They had to replace a lighting director at the last minute because the previous guy quit. And so they grabbed one off another part of this network to come in at the last minute and do the lighting. The sound system was so bad that the studio audience couldn't hear the live comedy sketches. That's how bad it was. It played well to the audience on broadcast, but the live audience couldn't hear the comedy sketches. So it's all going crazy. And this movie covers all of that brilliantly. It also shows that transition from the old comedy. Milton Berle is one of the people who is a character in this, played by J.K. Simmons, who again does a marvellous job of it. And Milton Berle did turn up in, I think, the 8th episode of Saturday Night Live and totally didn't get it and totally screwed that episode by bringing his old school Borscht Belt comedy to a new kind of comedy and just not digging what they were putting out. This is a crazily dynamic film too. There are lots of long tracking shots following characters through the studio and out of the building and into the dressing rooms and into the control room and all that kind of thing. There's an incredible amount of fluid camera work in this film that does really well. There's a beautiful grace note scene where Belushi and Gilda Radner are ice skating outside Rockefeller Center. It's a recognition of the two actors who didn't have long careers after Saturday Night Live. They both died early, and the movie gives them that grace note as well. It's also slightly scathing of Chevy Chase, and there's an old guy who gives a prediction about the future of Chevy Chase's career, which turns out to be exactly the future of Chevy Chase's career. This movie has a dynamism about it and a respect and a love for that period of comedy that really lands well. And one of the things that it really gives us is that imagination and energy of youth, and energy of youth that is changing the world. And all of these young actors and characters and talents just coming together to create something that hadn't been done before. That energy of youth really comes across in this movie incredibly well. And I loved it for that. I think there are a couple of bits where it wasn't perfect, but there always are. This is definitely a juggling act of a movie where if it falls apart, it just doesn't work anywhere. But all of the characters have plausibility. They look enough like the original actors to land it. The comedy is great. The dialogue is crisp as hell. There's an actor playing Michael O'Donoghue, one of the original writers for Saturday Night Live, who went on to do weird things like Mr. Mike's Mondo Video. And all of these people are incredibly smart, incredibly witty, and incredibly transgressive. And they change television forever. They have arguments with the lady who's the studio censor and have a bit of fun with that. Beautiful dialogue, incredibly funny script, and an energy that I really appreciate it. It's one of those movies that energizes you while you're watching it afterwards. It doesn't bring you down. It doesn't relax you. It makes you appreciate the passion of people who love what they're doing. That's a recommend for me. Whether you see it in the cinema or whether you see it in streaming, it's funny, it's passionate, it's touching, it works, and I think it does honour to Saturday Night Live, even though it doesn't stay canonically strictly to the history as it actually happened. Then we go into an Australian horror movie, and Australia's hitting hard with horror movies at the moment, and this one got a bit of criticism, and I'm going to address that. It's an Indigenous themed horror movie using real Indigenous history and Indigenous legends. It's directed and written by John Bell, an Indigenous man, and it stars Sherry Sebens and Mean Wyatt, and Tessa Rose as Sherry Sebens' character's mother. And it's a thing called the Moogai. Now, Sherry Sebens plays an Indigenous lawyer who's pregnant, and she's just had great success in the legal company she works for. Pregnant, and suddenly her water breaks. And she goes into hospital and things go wrong, and she actually dies for a couple of seconds while giving birth to this child. And that allows an Indigenous boogeyman spirit called the Moogai to detect her and her child and to attempt to steal her child. And Sherry Sebens' character Sarah goes through this arc. People think she's got postnatal depression. They think that she's just not coping, and she's not sleeping because she senses and detects that this creature is there and is trying to kidnap her new baby. She has an older daughter who's about 6 years old, and her daughter's being possessed by the spirit of the Moogai, who befriends her daughter in order to get the baby. Sarah has a complex family situation where when she was young she was adopted by a white family, and her birth mother, Ruth, played by Tessa Rose, has come back into her life. And it's Ruth who understands the Moogai because she had a sister who was kidnapped by the Moogai when she was a young girl. And Ruth is part of the stolen generation, the generation of Indigenous people who were put into orphanages by the government, even though they had parents, in order to try to breed out Aboriginal culture from Australia. It happened from the 1910s all the way to the 1970s. And there is a flashback to the way that worked in Indigenous communities, where when the government car would turn up on the Indigenous communities, the kids were trained to hide so that the government people, the gubbars, couldn't take them away. All of that is played really well in this movie. The historical context is given to us right at the very start of this film. And it's horrible and it's monstrous. And I grew up at school with Indigenous kids who were part of the stolen generation. Those kids were traumatized. And I have an incredible amount of empathy for them, because I'm not going to make this about myself, but my father, who was brutal, got custody of my brother and I when I was 8 years old. And I didn't see my mother again until I was 22 and reconnected with her. And being stolen from my family and put into a totally alien environment and hidden from my mother and her new husband was something I experienced. So that stuff in this movie hit me very hard. Sarah goes on this journey of not being believed. People think she's got postnatal depression. There are some people who interpret what she's going through in trying to fight the Moogai as being a bad parent and abusive. She picks up her child late from school, and because she's with a friend and they both had a couple of wines, the teacher won't let them take the kid away because they think that she is drunk when she's not. And a doctor gives her sedatives, and she ends up being drugged, which makes it harder for her to be able to defend her child against the Moogai. And she has a very strained relationship with her mother, Ruth, because she considers her parents to be the people who adopted her. And Ruth has old school Indigenous ways and wants to teach her daughter about Indigenous culture. And of course about the Moogai and the supernatural stuff as well, which Sarah does not believe until she inevitably has to. And there's this quest that the family goes on where Fergus, her husband, played by Mean White, who's a tradesman, he's a carpenter, and her flee the city and head up country to where her family's from so that Ruth can help her fight and defeat the Moogai. And they do have a confrontation on country, which is really great. Now, a lot of people have criticized this movie because the Moogai doesn't look the way they think it should. The horror doesn't play out like an American European kind of horror. A lot of it's grounded in Indigenous history and Indigenous legend and the trauma that the stolen generations experienced. And unless you're aware of that in a cultural sense, it's a little harder for people to understand exactly where John Bell takes this movie. But for me, it really works. It has a beautiful grace note ending, which I loved entirely. And it tells the story of Australian history, what the conservatives used to call black armband history, the history of the sadness and the trauma and the crimes against humanity that is replete in this modern Australian history. It tells that honestly, and it tells it through the medium of a horror movie. I like this movie a lot. I don't think it's the best horror movie in the world, but I think it's an honest one. It's a true one. Acting is fantastic in this. Tessa Rose is great as Ruth. Sherry Sebens is fantastic as Sarah. Mean Wyatt is really good as Fergus, who supports his wife. Yeah, they have disagreements about things. He thinks she's going nuts and he's really worried. He's just had her die giving birth and then come back to life again. She's having trouble with a new baby. He thinks it's postnatal depression. So there's an arc for him as well, which ends as they go up country and some things about him are revealed. It's a really solid little film. And even the Moogai itself, a grasping figure with long fingers, a pale humanoid creature with two faces, does represent something in Australian history. I like this one. It is getting a physical media release. In March, Umbrella Entertainment are putting it out in a collector's edition Blu-ray and a standard edition Blu-ray as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing that. But there's just so much good Australian horror coming out. And the Moogai is definitely part of that. It's got an ambience all its own, and it's got a viewpoint that I haven't seen before in an Australian horror movie. And I appreciate it for that. When you can get access to this one, I recommend you see it. If you're a horror movie fan, you're going to like it. The more you know about the history that informs the movie, the more you'll get it. But again, there have been people who reviewed it who just don't have the context to realise what this film is saying completely. They're looking at it just as a straight-up horror movie with some kind of ethnic background to it. But it is, for me at least, much more than that. and I recommend you check it out. So that's what I got for you this time around. A really shit, cynical, corporate Christmas movie, which isn't anywhere near as much fun as, say, Harold and Kumar's Christmas. And it's definitely not as much fun as Die Hard. And then 2 movies, one of which is about the passion of youth and changing the world and changing comedy as a medium. And a horror movie which is at its core about generational trauma. Some great films have come out this year. I've really loved going to the cinema and seeing things. It's been the year of The Substance, it's the Moogai, it's Saturday Night, it's any number of other films that have come out this year that are not the big films, not the big corporate jobbies, not the cynical and AI-tested movies, but movies that are made with passion and with talent and with dedication that are really connecting with audiences. And that's great stuff. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. You can also support the channel by donating through YouTube or else by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got the Wednesday video, and I've got some good ideas for that. And then, of course, we get back to Science Fiction Saturday once more. So until all of that happens, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Maybe spend a week where you don't watch big corporate tentpole movies and cleanse your palate with some smaller, more passionate films. And I'll catch you next time.
Thank you.